Death, when it came to Sir Reginald Hargreaves, arrived with perfect manners. At precisely 11 minutes past 10 on a rain-lashed November evening in 1936, the richest man in Threadneedle Street was discovered slumped across his desk in the library of Hargreaves Hall, a crystal tumbler still clutched in his rigid fingers. The brandy smelled faintly of bitter almonds, yet the autopsy would insist upon aconite. No one had entered the room. No one had left. The door was locked from the inside, and Hercule Poirot, that fastidious little Belgian with the incomparable moustaches, murmured only one thing when he heard the news. Chapter 1. The locked library. It had been gathering all day above the North Downs, a bruised, swollen sky that pressed down upon the Kentish countryside, until the very air seemed to groan. By 9 o'clock, the first fat drops struck the leaded windows of Hargreaves Hall. By past, the rain had become a roaring curtain that turned the gravel drive into a rushing stream and transformed every gutter into a waterfall. Inside the great house, the inhabitants moved like actors who had forgotten their lines. Servants hovered in corridors, afraid to speak above a whisper. Lamps flickered in the draughts that found their way through centuries-old stone. Somewhere, a clock struck the 3/4 hour, its chime half drowned by thunder. At precisely 11 minutes past 10, the scream came. It was not the theatrical shriek of a housemaid discovering a mouse. It was raw, animal, the sound a human throat makes only when the mind has seen something it cannot unsee. It rose from the west wing, ricocheted along oak-panelled passages, and shattered the brittle silence that had gripped the house since dinner. Footsteps pounded, doors slammed, another cry, this one male, hoarse with disbelief. And then, quite suddenly, silence again, heavier than before. In the library, Sir Reginald Hargreaves sat alone with his triumph and his terror. He had dismissed the last servant at 9:45, waving away the offer of coffee with the curt cruelty that had become his habit. The new will lay signed and sealed upon the blotter before him. 27 pages that would reduce his wife to genteel poverty and elevate a Covent Garden chorus girl to riches beyond the dreams of avarice. He had reread the clauses twice, savouring each paragraph the way a miser fingers gold. At 10 o'clock he had risen, crossed to the mahogany tantalus, and poured 3 fingers of the 1875 brandy he kept for such occasions. The decanter was almost empty. He made a mental note to speak severely to the butler. Then he had returned to his desk, turned the key in the lock, his nightly ritual against imagined intruders, and settled himself to gloat. The library was a fortress of books and shadows. Tier upon tier of morocco-bound volumes climbed to a painted ceiling where gods and goddesses cavorted in faded splendour. A coal fire hissed in the Adam grate, throwing long flickers across the turkey carpet. The only light came from the green-shaded reading lamp on the desk and the occasional blue-white flash of lightning that revealed the room in merciless detail. The dead man's heavy features, the crystal tumbler still clutched in rigid fingers, the dark stains spreading across legal parchment where brandy had slopped as the glass slipped from his hand. Sir Reginald's eyes were wide, staring at something just beyond the edge of the world. His mouth had fallen open as though to protest the indecent haste of his departure. A thin line of foam, faintly blue, edged his lower lip. Death had called without knocking, and Sir Reginald Hargreaves, tyrant, genius, monster to some, god to others, had answered. Upstairs in the blue guest suite that had once been a nursery, Lady Lydia Hargreaves stood at her window watching the storm. She wore a dressing gown of ivory silk that made her look even more fragile than usual. a porcelain doll someone had forgotten to put back in its box. Her reflection in the glass was pale and perfect, the reflection of a woman who had spent 15 years perfecting the art of appearing breakable. She did not turn when the scream came. She had been expecting something of the sort for weeks. In the servants' hall, the butler Fanshawe, a man who had served the family since the old Queen's Jubilee, poured himself a small whisky with hands that did not shake. He had seen worse things in Flanders, though not by much. He drank the whisky neat, set the glass down with care, and began the grim business of telephoning Scotland Yard. At Scotland Yard itself, Inspector Japp was already reaching for his hat when the call came through. He had dined unwisely on soused herring, and his temper was frayed, but the name Hargreaves cut through indigestion like a knife. "Tell them not to touch anything," he barked into the receiver, "and for God's sake find out if Poirot's still in London." Hercule Poirot was, as it happened, enjoying a tisane in his pristine flat at 56B Whitehaven Mansions. He had spent the evening arranging his ties according to the subtlest gradations of hue, and was now rewarding himself with a copy of Le Temps and the exquisite silence that follows a day of perfect order. The telephone bell shattered both. "Mon Dieu," he sighed, laying aside the newspaper with the care of a man setting down fragile porcelain. "Always it is, when the digestion is delicate." The voice at the other end belonged to Japp, breathless and bad-tempered. "Poirot, you'll want this one. Sir Reginald Hargreaves, poisoned in a locked room, door bolted on the inside, key in the lock, windows fastened, no sign of a struggle. The family doctor says aconite, and plenty of it. Thought you'd like to see an impossible crime before the trail gets cold." Poirot's eyes brightened. He reached automatically for the little leather notebook he kept for such occasions. "Give me the address again, mon ami, and tell them that Hercule Poirot is coming." 2 hours later, 2 hours of rain and wind and treacherous country roads, our little party descended upon Hargreaves Hall like avenging furies in a Morris Cowley. There was Poirot, immaculate despite the weather in a fur-collared overcoat and grey suede gloves. Myself, soaked to the skin and trying not to show it. Inspector Japp, purple with cold and thwarted ambition. And Sergeant Beddoes, who carried the inevitable black bag of officialdom. Fanshawe received us in the marble entrance hall, his face the colour of old parchment. "This way, gentlemen. Nothing has been disturbed, as per instructions." We followed him through corridors heavy with the smell of beeswax and old money. Ancestral portraits glared down at us, Hargreaveses in armour, in periwigs, in the stiff collars of the Edwardian era. All shared the same predatory noses and the same cold eyes. Sir Reginald's portrait already hung in pride of place above the staircase, painted only last year. The artist had caught the banker perfectly. The thin, cruel mouth, the calculating stare, the faint suggestion of a sneer. Even in oils he looked capable of ruining a man before breakfast and forgetting his name by lunch. The library door stood ajar. A uniformed constable guarded it like Cerberus, rain dripping from his helmet onto the parquet. Inside, the scene was exactly as Japp had described, only more so. Sir Reginald sat upright in his high-backed chair, head fallen forward, chin resting on the starched front of his evening shirt. The brandy glass lay on its side amid scattered papers, a dark stain spreading like spilled blood. The decanter on the tantalus was nearly empty. The key glittered in the lock. Every window was fastened tight against the storm. Poirot stood in the doorway for a long moment, taking in every detail with those disconcertingly bright eyes. Parfait, he murmured at last. A classic tableau. The locked room, the poisoned drink, the victim alone with his thoughts and his doom. One could almost believe in destiny. He moved forward with the neat, precise steps that always reminded me of a cat walking across wet grass. His gloved fingers brushed the air above the body, as though feeling for invisible threads. "Observe, Hastings," he said softly. "The glass has fallen from the right hand, yet Sir Reginald was left-handed. I remember it from the newspapers when he opened the new bank in Lombard Street. Curious." He bent closer to the tumbler. A faint bluish residue clung to the inside like the bloom on a grape. And this colour, it is not the usual yellow of commercial aconite. No, this is something rarer, something perhaps homegrown. Japp snorted. "Suicide, plain as the nose on your face. Man signs a will cutting out the wife, knows she'll make trouble, decides to end it all with style. Happens every day among the better classes." Poirot's smile was wintry. "My dear Japp, suicide is never plain. And a man who chooses poison does not lock the door against rescue. He locks it against discovery too late. No, this is murder. Murder most artful." He turned to the constable. "Who found the body?" "The nephew, sir, Mr. Felix Carstairs. He says he came to borrow a book and found the door locked. Knocked, no answer. Got worried, fetched the butler. They broke in together." "And the time?" 11 minutes past 10, near enough. The hall clock was striking as they forced the door. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Precise, these English clocks. And the household, where were they at 11 minutes past 10? The constable consulted his notebook. Lady Lydia was in her room. Miss Weatherby, the secretary, was typing letters in the morning room. Mr. Carstairs says he was in the billiard room. Mr. Victor Lang, the gentleman who arrived unexpectedly after dinner, was smoking a cigar in the conservatory. Servants all below stairs, except the footman on duty. "Parfait," Poirot said again. 5 people who hated Sir Reginald Hargreaves quite sufficiently to kill him, and not one of them with an alibi worth the paper it is written on. He moved to the French windows, examined the bolts, ran a finger along the sill. No scratches, no mud, no sign that anyone had tampered with them. Outside, lightning clawed across the sky, illuminating the terrace and the formal gardens beyond. For a heartbeat the scene was bright as day. Clipped yew hedges, a marble fountain, and at the far end, half hidden by dripping ivy, the glass roof of a large conservatory that glinted like a jewel. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Ah," he said softly, "the conservatory. One wonders what exotic blooms Lady Lydia cultivates in that temple of glass." He turned back to the room, his gaze sweeping over every surface with the concentration of a man reading a difficult text in a foreign language. On the desk lay the new will, its ribbons still crisp. Poirot glanced at it, lips pursed. So, he has disinherited the beautiful Lydia for a dancer from the Gaiety. Mon Dieu, the foolishness of elderly gentlemen. One does not need to be a detective to see the motive here. Japp cleared his throat. "All the same, Poirot. Door locked, key inside, windows bolted. How did the murderer get the poison into the brandy and out again without leaving a trace?" Poirot twirled his moustache, a sure sign that the little grey cells were marching in formation. "That, mon ami, is what makes this crime a masterpiece. But masterpieces, like eggs, can be broken, and Hercule Poirot is very good at breaking eggs." He looked once more at the dead man, at the rigid fingers still curved as though around the stem of a glass that had betrayed him. Sir Reginald Hargreaves believed himself master of every situation, Poirot said quietly. Tonight he discovered that even masters can be poisoned by those they most despise. Thunder rolled overhead like the laughter of malevolent gods. Somewhere in the house a woman began to weep. The sound thin and high and endless. The storm had only just begun. Chapter 2. 5 people who wished him dead morning arrived grey and reluctant, as though the sky itself resented being dragged back to Hargreaves Hall. A thin, cold mist clung to the lawns. Every window wept slow tears of condensation. Inside, the house felt like a mausoleum that had mistakenly been told the funeral was postponed. Poirot had not slept. I found him in the breakfast room at 7:30, immaculate in a charcoal suit with a white carnation, demolishing a plate of œufs en cocotte as though the fate of civilization depended upon it. He greeted me with a raised eyebrow. "Ah, Hastings, you have the face of a man who has seen the gallows erected in his dreams. Sit, eat. We have much to do." And the little grey cells function poorly on an empty stomach. I obeyed, though the kippers looked as mournful as the weather. Through the tall windows, we could see constables moving like blue beetles across the terrace, searching flower beds for footprints that the rain had long since erased. At 8 o'clock precisely, Poirot clapped his hands once. A sharp continental sound that brought Fanshawe hurrying in, as though summoned by a bell only Belgians can hear. The drawing-room, if you please. Fires lit, chairs arranged in a polite little circle, and the family informed that Hercule Poirot requires their presence at 1/2 the hour. No excuses, no headaches, no sudden attacks of nerves, all of them. Fanshawe inclined his head the exact fraction required by perfect service and withdrew. By 8:35, the drawing-room had become a stage, and we its unwilling audience. The chamber was magnificent in the overbearing style of 1870, gilded cornices, mirrors that doubled the chill, a chandelier the size of a small planet, dripping Bohemian crystal. A fire struggled valiantly in the marble grate, throwing more smoke than heat. They entered one by one, like characters announced by an invisible major domo. First came Lady Lydia Hargreaves, swathed in black lace that probably cost more than a constable earned in a year. Grief had refined her beauty to something almost translucent. The skin beneath her eyes was the delicate violet of crushed violets. She moved as though every step might shatter her. Behind her, leaning heavily on a Malacca cane, came Mr. Victor Lang, 55, florid, the ruined banker whose empire Sir Reginald had dismantled in a single ruthless week on the stock exchange. Lang's eyes were bloodshot. His hands trembled slightly. Whether from rage or drink it was hard to say. Felix Carstairs sauntered in next. The nephew, 29, handsome in the careless way of men who have never been denied anything except responsibility. His morning suit was already creased, his tie askew. He lit a Turkish cigarette with deliberate nonchalance and exhaled towards the ceiling. Miss Daphne Weatherby followed, upright as a sergeant major. 43 iron-grey hair scraped into a bun, steel spectacles flashing. For 23 years she had been Sir Reginald's confidential secretary. Now she looked like a woman who had misplaced the only compass she ever trusted. Last of all, Inspector Japp, arms folded, stationed by the door like a bulldog guarding a particularly suspicious bone. Poirot waited until the silence became uncomfortable, then smiled his small cat-like smile. "Mesdames, messieurs, we are gathered, how do you say, to place the cards upon the table. Sir Reginald Hargreaves was poisoned last night with a rare preparation of aconitine in his own library behind a locked door. Someone in this room knows exactly how it was accomplished. Someone else, perhaps the same person, has spent the night rehearsing innocence. My task is to discover which performance deserves the prize." He paused, letting the words settle. "Let us begin with motives, for murder without motive is like soup without salt. Possible, but hardly palatable." He turned first to Lady Lydia. She lifted her veil. Her eyes were dry now, and very bright. "Madam, your husband intended to leave you destitute in favour of a young woman whose talents, I understand, are displayed principally upon the stage of the Gaiety Theatre. Is this correct?" A faint flush rose in her cheeks. "He was entitled to do as he wished with his own fortune." "Admirable restraint," Poirot murmured. "Yet last night you dined with a man who had just signed your ruin. You retired early, pleading a headache. At what hour did that headache begin, madame?" "Immediately after the fish," she said steadily. "Reginald was particularly cruel. He toasted new beginnings and looked directly at me." Victor Lang gave a bark of laughter. "Cruel? Madame, the man was a vampire. He sucked my bank dry and laughed while the receivers counted the spoons. I came here last night to horsewhip him, not to poison him, but I wish to God I'd thought of it first." Poirot raised a hand. "Patience, monsieur. Your turn approaches." He faced Felix Carstairs. "And you, Monsieur le Neveu, your allowance. Cut off entirely last month, I believe. You were heard to say in your club that you would dance on your uncle's grave." Felix shrugged. "I was drunk, everyone says that sort of thing. Yet you were seen driving away from the house at 9:45. Where did you go?" For the first time the young man looked uncomfortable. "Nowhere. Just for a drive. Needed air. In a thunderstorm." Poirot's tone was silk over steel. Felix stubbed out his cigarette with unnecessary violence. "All right. I went to the village. There's a girl. Married. It doesn't matter." "It matters very much if it gives you an alibi," Japp growled. Miss Weatherby spoke for the first time. Her voice clipped and precise. "Sir Reginald dismissed me yesterday. After 23 years. No reference, no pension. He said I was growing old and slow." Her lips twisted. "I typed the new will myself. I saw what he planned for Lady Lydia. I saw what he planned for all of us." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "And you, mademoiselle, are a woman of science. Botany was once your passion, I believe. You correspond with Kew Gardens on the subject of poisonous plants." Daphne Weatherby met his gaze without flinching. "I do, and yes, I know exactly how much aconite it takes to kill a man. But knowing and doing are rather different things, Monsieur Poirot." For a long moment, nobody spoke. Rain lashed the windows like thrown gravel. Poirot reached into his pocket and produced a small glass vial. Inside, faint blue crystals glittered like sapphire dust. "This," he said softly, "was scraped from beneath the victim's fingernails. No, forgive me, from beneath the fingernails of the person who handled the concentrated poison without adequate care. One of you has very dirty hands." He held the vial to the light. 5 pairs of eyes followed it, as though it were a hypnotist's coin. Lady Lydia gave a small theatrical gasp and slid gracefully to the carpet in a dead faint. Felix swore under his breath. Victor Lang stared as though he might be sick. Daphne Weatherby's hand flew to her mouth. Only Poirot remained unmoved. "Dear me," he said pleasantly, "we appear to have touched a nerve." He bent, sniffed the smelling salts Japp produced, and watched Lady Lydia's eyelids flutter. "Chapter 1 is complete," he murmured to me, as the others were led away to separate rooms. "Now, the real performance begins." Outside, the mist began to lift, revealing the glass roof of the distant conservatory glinting like a malevolent eye. Chapter 3. The Monkshood Conservatory. By 10 o'clock the mist had burned away, leaving the gardens of Hargreaves Hall raw and glistening. as though the storm had flayed the landscape overnight. Poirot and I walked the gravel path that led to the walled garden, our footsteps crunching in unison. He carried a small green baize bag and wore the expression of a man about to open a parcel he has long suspected contains a bomb. "Observe, Hastings," he said, gesturing with his cane at the beds of sodden Michaelmas daisies. "Everything is washed clean. Footprints, fingerprints, the little betrayals of the criminal, all dissolved. Nature is sometimes the accomplice of murder." At the far end, half concealed by a towering yew hedge, clipped into the shape of a rearing stallion, stood the conservatory. It was a cathedral of glass and iron, Victorian in its extravagance, its panes filmed with condensation. A faint cloying sweetness drifted through the broken seal of the door. Poirot paused on the threshold. "Monk's hood," he announced with satisfaction. "Aconitum napellus in its most virulent form. Lady Lydia has exquisite taste in death." He pushed open the door, and we stepped into a humid, green world. The air was thick, almost tropical. Orchids drooped from bark like exotic parasites. Ferns unfurled in silent explosion. In the centre, raised on brick plinths, stood long tables covered with earthenware pots. And there, ranked like an army of purple-hooded monks, grew the aconite. Not the common wolf's bane of cottage gardens, but a rare strain, flowers of an intense, almost cobalt blue, the colour of a Mediterranean evening. Their stems rose straight and sinister, each bloom a tiny helmet, hiding poison more deadly than any bullet. Poirot moved between them with reverence. "Magnifique! Aconitum feroxvar, ceruleum, almost unknown in England. The root contains 3 times the alkaloid of ordinary monkshood. 1 gram, pure, is sufficient for a regiment." I felt the hairs rise on my neck. Good Lord, Poirot! She kept this under her husband's nose for years? "Precisely. And see," he indicated a corner workbench sheltered by a screen of latticed bamboo. Upon it stood a small copper alembic still, the kind used by medieval alchemists, its coils stained violet. Beside it lay a pair of ladies' gardening gloves, kid leather gone stiff with dried sap, and a chipped Sèvres saucer containing a quantity of coarse blue-white powder. Poirot lifted the saucer to his nose, inhaled delicately, and nodded. Aconitine hydrochloride, freshly crystallized. Enough here for 20 murders. He opened his baize bag and produced a camel hair brush and a series of small glass tubes. With infinite care, he swept a sample of the powder into one tube, stoppered it, and labelled it in his neat continental hand. "Scotland Yard will confirm, but I, Hercule Poirot, already know this is identical to the residue in Sir Reginald's glass." A faint sound made us turn. The door had opened silently. Daphne Weatherby stood framed against the bright outer day, her face drained of colour. "You are too late, Monsieur Poirot," she said, voice flat. "Lady Lydia has gone. The Dover packet sailed at 9. She took only a small valise and her jewel case." For a moment, even Poirot seemed taken aback. Then his eyes narrowed to green slits. "Non, mademoiselle. Lady Lydia is at this moment taking breakfast in the morning room. I removed her passport from the secret drawer in her dressing table at 7 o'clock. A little precaution." Miss Weatherby's composure cracked like thin ice. "You had no right. I have every right when murder is done. Tell me, did you help her pack this imaginary valise, or did you merely watch from the window and hope she would flee?" She took one involuntary step forward, eyes blazing behind the spectacles. "She is a murderess. For 15 years I watched her play the fragile flower, while she bled him with couture bills and pretended tears. When he finally saw her for what she was, when he decided to cut her out entirely, she killed him. This, she swept a trembling hand at the monk's hood, this is her private kingdom. No one else was allowed in here, not even the gardeners. Poirot regarded her thoughtfully. And yet you enter now with remarkable freedom. I have a key, she said defiantly, producing it from her pocket. Sir Reginald gave it to me years ago, when I helped catalogue Lady Lydia's specimens for the Royal Horticultural Society. He trusted me. Trusted you sufficiently to let you handle the most poisonous plants in England, Poirot murmured, curious. He moved to a row of glass cloches protecting delicate seedlings. Lifting one, he revealed tiny monk's hood plants no more than 3 inches high, their roots wrapped in damp moss. These were planted 6 weeks ago, he said. The root takes many months to reach lethal potency, yet someone has been harvesting mature roots for some time. Observe the gaps in the rows. Miss Weatherby followed his gaze, and her hand flew to her mouth. Poirot turned to her gently. Mademoiselle, you hated Sir Reginald for dismissing you, but you hated Lady Lydia more, n'est-ce pas? You hoped to see her hang. That is why you left the still uncleaned, the gloves in plain sight. You wished us to find this laboratory. Her knees buckled. She caught at the edge of a table, knocking over a pot. Dark soil spilled like blood across the flags. I wanted justice, she whispered. He was cruel, yes, but she destroyed him inch by inch. And when he finally tried to escape her, she poisoned him like a rat. Poirot replaced the cloche with care. Justice is a dangerous hobby, mademoiselle. Sometimes it wears the mask of murder. He offered her his arm. After a moment, she took it, moving like a sleepwalker. As we emerged into the cold daylight, the sun broke through for the first time, striking the glass roof of the conservatory so that it blazed like a great emerald. Somewhere inside, a single drop of condensation slid down a pane and fell with a sound like a tear. Poirot looked back once. The conservatory has confessed, he said quietly. Now we must discover whether its mistress will do the same. Chapter 4. The Nephew's Alibi. Felix Carstairs was playing billiards with the furious concentration of a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. The green-shaded lamps above the table threw harsh circles of light onto his blonde head and the scarlet cloth. Every few seconds the cue cracked against a ball, with a violence that made the constable on guard flinch. Poirot and I watched from the doorway for a full minute before Felix noticed us. When he did, he straightened slowly, chalking his cue with exaggerated care. "Come to take me away in irons, have you?" His voice was light, but the knuckles gripping the cue were white. "Only if you insist, monsieur," Poirot replied pleasantly. "For the moment, I wish merely to watch a master at work. Pray continue." Felix hesitated, then shrugged and bent over the table again. He was left-handed. I had noticed it the previous evening. The cue slid through his fingers with practiced grace as he attempted a difficult cannon. The balls kissed, rolled, and stopped inches short of the pocket. "Damn," he muttered. Poirot stepped forward. "Permit me." He took the cue, sighted along it with theatrical solemnity, and executed the same cannon flawlessly. The balls clicked home like obedient children. Felix stared. "You play?" "In my youth I was champion of the Brussels police. Precision, monsieur, is everything." Poirot returned the cue. "Tell me, when you were practicing last night, alone, from 9:30 until the discovery of your uncle's body, were you also left-handed?" Felix flushed. "Of course, always have been." "Then explain, if you please, why every chalk mark on the rests is on the right-hand side of the table," he pointed. Sure enough, The wooden rests bore a series of pale blue smudges, perfect ovals, where a right-handed player had leaned them while studying angles. There was not a single mark on the left. Felix opened his mouth, closed it again. Poirot continued, almost kindly. And the score sheet on the peg, dated yesterday in your own hand, records a break of 73. Yet the highest break possible with the balls in their current position is 41. Someone has been creative. Felix threw the cue onto the table with a clatter. All right, you clever little swine. I wasn't here. I left the house at 20 to 10. I drove to the village, satisfied. Immensely, Poirot said. The village is 3 miles distant. You returned when? 11:15 or thereabouts. The storm was frightful. I nearly put the Bentley in a ditch. When I got back, everyone was running about shouting that Uncle Reggie was dead. I joined the hue and cry like a good little heir. He lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. Look, I loathed the old devil. He'd threatened to cut me off 100 times, and last week he finally did it. But I didn't poison him. He glanced at the constable and lowered his voice. I was with a woman, Mrs. Forrester, the squire's wife. She'll deny it, of course. Her husband's a brute and keeps a shotgun for poachers and lovers alike. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Love, the most inconvenient of alibis. Yet also the most convincing when it is genuine. You quarrelled with her. God, yes. She wants to run away to Kenya. I pointed out that I now haven't a bean to my name. We parted in tears and recriminations. I drove back through the storm feeling thoroughly sorry for myself. That's the truth, Poirot. Poirot considered him for a long moment. You are a young man who lives for pleasure, monsieur. Murder requires patience, planning, the cold distillation of hatred over months. You are capable of striking a man in anger, yes. But to grow monkshood, to extract the pure alkaloid, to wait for the perfect evening, that is the work of a different temperament. He turned to the constable. You will verify Mr. Carstairs' presence at Keeper's Cottage between 10 o'clock and 11. Discreetly. The constable saluted and departed. Felix exhaled shakily. Then, I'm in the clear? As far as murder is concerned, for adultery and reckless driving, I fear the squire must be your judge. Poirot permitted himself a small smile. 1 suspect eliminated, 4 remain. As we left the billiard room, Felix called after us, voice suddenly uncertain. Poirot, do you really think Lydia did it? Poirot paused in the doorway. I think, monsieur, that someone in this house has played a very long game indeed, and the board is not yet cleared. We walked along the corridor. Somewhere a clock struck the quarter. Poirot tapped his cane thoughtfully against the parquet. Notice, Hastings, how quickly young Mr. Carstairs abandoned his pose of indifference when the net appeared to tighten. A guilty man would have blustered longer. No, Felix is that most useful creature in a murder investigation. The suspect who is innocent of the crime, but guilty of something else entirely. And Mrs. Forrester, I asked, will confirm his story the moment her maid is out of earshot. Passion is a great destroyer of discretion. He chuckled. We have removed the nephew from our little list, but observe how each elimination narrows the circle, like the petals of a flower closing at dusk. Or the hood of a monk's hood, I said, remembering the sinister blue blooms. Précisément. Poirot's eyes glittered. We are drawing closer to the root, Hastings, much closer. He stopped suddenly outside a baize door that led to the servants' stairs. One more thing. The second footman, James, I think, told the police he saw a car leaving the grounds at 9:45. A Bentley. Yet Felix claims he left at 20 to 10. 10 minutes unaccounted for. Interesting, n'est-ce pas? Before I could answer, He was already descending the narrow staircase, humming a little tune under his breath, the sure sign that the little grey cells were dancing. Chapter 5. The Secretary's Secret. The study of Sir Reginald Hargreaves smelled of cigar smoke, sealing wax, and the particular chill that settles when a tyrant is no longer there to warm the room. The chair behind the great partner's desk still bore the imprint of his broad back. Papers lay scattered like the debris of a battlefield. Daphne Weatherby sat very straight on the edge of a leather club chair, hands folded in her lap, spectacles reflecting the firelight like twin shields. Poirot did not sit. He prowled. He prowled along the shelves of ledgers, the glass-fronted cabinets of share certificates, the rows of silver trophies won at Bisley and Cowes. Finally, he stopped before a small oil painting, an unremarkable Dutch interior. Hercule tilted it a fraction to the left. "Perfect symmetry displeases me," he explained. "It is the mistake of the amateur. A guilty man always straightens what he has disturbed." Miss Weatherby watched him warily. Poirot turned. "Mademoiselle, you typed Sir Reginald's letters for 23 years. You knew the pressure of his pen, the angle of his script, the way his hand trembled after the stroke last February. You knew everything." "I was paid to know," she said. "Yet on the new will, the will that disinherited Lady Lydia and left the bulk of the estate to a certain Miss Valerie Sinclair of the Gaiety Chorus, you made a tiny error. Observe." He laid 2 documents side by side on the blotter, an ordinary business letter dated March and the will itself. With a magnifying lens, he indicated the capital R in Reginald. In March and after, the R has a short, almost horizontal cross-stroke, the result of the tremor. Yet on the will, the cross-stroke sweeps upward in the old confident flourish, a difference of perhaps 2 millimeters, but to the trained eye, thunderous. Miss Weatherby's lips parted, but no sound came. Poirot continued, voice gentle, relentless. "You forged the will, mademoiselle. Not the entire document. Sir Reginald was quite capable of signing his own ruin, but the date. The original will was executed in September, when the tremor was already pronounced. You altered the date to last week, added the flourish you remembered from happier years, and inserted 2 fresh clauses that were never dictated, one disinheriting Lady Lydia entirely, the other leaving a legacy of £50,000 to yourself for faithful service." He produced the will from his pocket and laid it beside the letter. The difference was now glaring. Daphne Weatherby's composure cracked like old porcelain. "He was going to die anyway," she whispered. "The doctors gave him a year at most. When he told me he was cutting Lydia out, I thought, after 23 years, he might remember me. When he didn't," her voice hardened, "I decided to remind him. By forging his dying wishes, by giving him what he wanted." She leant forward fiercely. "He hated her, Monsieur Poirot. Hated the way she spent, the way she mocked him behind that breakable doll mask. I thought if I made the will harsher, more vindictive, he would be pleased. He would see that someone understood him at last. And when he discovered the forgery? He never did. He signed it on Friday and locked it in the safe. I watched him do it." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Then why, mademoiselle, did you leave the conservatory in deliberate disarray? The still uncleaned, the gloves stained, the saucer of pure aconitine in plain sight. You wanted us to find Lady Lydia's laboratory." Miss Weatherby laughed. A short, bitter sound. "Of course I did. She killed him. I knew she would the moment he told her about Valerie Sinclair. Lydia is vain, cruel, and clever. She has grown monkshood for years. She boasts about it. When I realized he was dead, I saw my chance. Let her hang for it. Let her precious white hands feel the rope. I only accelerated justice. Poirot regarded her for a long moment. You hated Sir Reginald for dismissing you without a penny after a lifetime of service, yet you hated his wife more. She destroyed him, Daphne said simply. Day by day, smile by smile. He was brutal, yes, but he was alive. She turned him into a bitter old man who preferred chorus girls to his own wife. And when he finally tried to escape her, she poisoned him like vermin. Tears stood in her eyes now, but they were tears of rage, not remorse. Poirot spoke softly. You have confessed to forgery, mademoiselle, possibly to obstructing justice, but not to murder. I didn't kill him, she said. I wanted him alive and grateful. Dead men give no references. Poirot nodded slowly. Then you are, like Mr. Felix, innocent of the crime we investigate, yet guilty of something almost as dangerous. The desire to see another human being destroyed. He moved to the door and opened it. Inspector Japp waited outside with 2 constables. Miss Weatherby will accompany you to the station, Poirot told him. Charges to be determined. She has been most helpful. As the secretary was led away, head high, step firm, Japp muttered, Another one off the list. That leaves the wife and the rival, Lang. Patience, mon ami, Poirot said. We eliminate the innocent so that the guilty may stand revealed in all their terrible solitude. He glanced back at the desk where the forged will lay like a dead thing. 2 suspects cleared, 2 remain, and somewhere in this house is a single blue stain that will tell us which of the 2 has blood on her hands. He closed the study door with the soft finality of a coffin lid. Chapter 6. The Rival's Revenge. Victor Lang was in the gun-room, cleaning a 12-bore Purdy with the slow, loving strokes of a man who had nothing left to lose. The smell of gun oil and hop solvent hung heavy in the air, mingling with the ghost of expensive cigars. He did not look up when Poirot and I entered, but the set of his shoulders told us he had been expecting us for some time. "Sit if you like, Monsieur Poirot," he rumbled, snapping the breech shut with a sound like a judge's gavel. "Or stand. Makes no difference. I'm done running." Poirot chose a leather cartridge box and perched on it neatly, legs crossed. I remained by the door, feeling the chill that seeped from the stone walls. "You are a direct man, Monsieur Lang. I admire directness. It saves so much time. Tell me then, did you poison Sir Reginald Hargreaves?" Lang gave a short, humourless laugh. "I wish I had. I'd sleep better for it." He laid the Purdy in its baize-lined case and turned to face us. His eyes were bloodshot, but steady. 3 months ago, Hargreaves ruined me. One whispered rumour in the right ear, one forged telegram, and the Long Frere's bank was finished. My partners fled like rats. My wife took the children to her mother in Scotland. I kept the house in Eaton Square only because the receivers hadn't yet changed the locks. I came here last night to put a bullet through his black heart, not to lace his brandy with monkshood." Poirot inclined his head. "Yet you arrived after dinner, uninvited, and remained until the body was discovered. A curious time to choose for a duel." Lang's mouth twisted. I lost my nerve in the hall. Fanshawe tried to turn me away, but I pushed past. I found Hargreaves in the library, gloating over the new will. He laughed at me, said I was welcome to shoot him, but that even a corpse's estate could ruin me twice over. Then he poured himself a drink, locked the door in my face, and left me standing there like a fool. He opened a drawer and took out a thick folder tied with pink tape. While he was busy dying, I was in the drawing-room going through his private papers. "Look." He tossed the folder onto the table. Inside were share certificates, letters, balance sheets, every detail of a meticulously planned hostile takeover of what remained of Lang's banking empire. I needed him alive, Monsieur Poirot. Alive and watching while I stripped him the way he stripped me. Poison was too merciful. Poirot leafed through the documents with growing interest. Dates, signatures, stock transfers, all perfectly legal and utterly lethal. Admirable work, he murmured. You would have ruined him by Christmas. If he'd lived that long, Lang said grimly. The doctors gave him a year at best. I was content to wait. He closed the drawer with a slam. Check my clothes if you wish. No blue stains, no smell of monkshood on my cuffs. I smoke Havana cigars, strong enough to cover anything. But I never went near that damned conservatory. Ask the servants. After Hargreaves locked the library door, I went straight to the gun room, poured myself a whiskey, and stayed here until the screaming started. Poirot studied him for a long moment, then nodded. You are a scavenger, monsieur, not an assassin. You feed on the wounded, but you do not strike Jules the first blow. You are eliminated. Lang's shoulders sagged, not with relief, but with the exhaustion of a man who has carried hatred so long it has become part of his skeleton. Then it was Lydia, he said quietly. I always knew she would kill him one day. She has ice where her heart should be. Perhaps, Poirot said, perhaps not. But you have given me something more valuable than a confession, monsieur. You have given me time, the one thing the murderer believed she had stolen. He rose. Come, Hastings. 3 suspects cleared. 1 remains. As we left the gun room, Lang called after us, voice rough. Poirot, when you have her, don't be gentle. Some women are born poisonous. Poirot did not reply. He was already walking, cane tapping a measured rhythm on the flagstones. In the corridor, he paused beneath a portrait of Sir Reginald in his prime. Arrogant, vital, already cruel. Notice, Hastings, he said softly, how each of our innocent suspects hated the victim, yet none hated him enough to wait years for the perfect murder. That requires a colder passion than greed or revenge. That requires the patience of a spouse. He glanced toward the great staircase that led to the private apartments. Tomorrow we confront the last player on our little stage, and then, mon ami, the curtain falls. Behind us, the gunroom door closed with the quiet finality of a mausoleum gate. Chapter 7. The Wife's Confession. Lady Lydia received us in the little boudoir that opened off her bedroom. A room all pale silks, French gilt, and the heavy sweetness of dying tuberoses. She sat on a chaise longue, wrapped in a tea-gown of black lace over ivory satin, looking as though she had been arranged there by a painter who specialized in doomed aristocrats. A small fire crackled in the grate, yet the air felt colder than the corridor outside. She did not rise when Poirot entered. Only her eyes moved, violet, enormous, and quite dry. So, Monsieur Poirot, she said in the low musical voice that had once made duchesses envy her, you have come to watch the spider die in her own web. Poirot bowed with exquisite politeness and took the delicate chair opposite her. I remained standing, feeling suddenly like an intruder at a private execution. Madam, he began, I have eliminated every other person in this house. The nephew was with his married lover. The secretary forged a will, but did not poison a man. The ruined banker planned a financial revenge, not a physical one. Even the servants are innocent of everything except fear. There remains only you. Lady Lydia lifted a cigarette in a long jade holder, allowed Poirot to light it, and drew the smoke deep into her lungs as though it were the first honest breath she had taken in years. "Then I may as well confess," she said, exhaling a perfect azure ring. "It will save us both time." Poirot's eyebrows rose a fraction. "Confess, madame?" "Everything." She tapped ash into a Sèvres bowl with deliberate grace. "I grew the monk's hood. I distilled the aconitine in my little copper still. I knew exactly how much would kill a man of Reginald's weight and constitution, 1 level teaspoon in his brandy. I even chose the evening, the night he signed the new will, when he would lock the door to gloat in private. I waited until he was alone. Then I carried the decanter to the library, poured, and left him to his triumph." She paused, studying the glowing tip of her cigarette. "I intended to take the rest myself afterwards. A gentlewoman's exit, poison in the conservatory with the flowers I loved. But when I returned with a fresh glass for my own dose, he was already dead, slumped across the desk like a sack. The key was in the lock, exactly as he always left it. Someone had anticipated me." Poirot leaned forward very slightly. "You are saying, madame, that you planned the perfect murder and discovered it already accomplished?" "Precisely." A faint, bitter smile touched her mouth. "I have been robbed of even that satisfaction." For a long moment, the only sound was the soft ticking of a Sèvres clock and the occasional pop of burning apple wood. Poirot spoke at last, gently. "You ask me to believe that you carried poisoned brandy to the library, found your husband already dead from the same poison, and then, what? Removed the evidence, cleaned the decanter, wiped away every trace of your presence?" "I did none of those things," she said. "I simply closed the door and walked away. The decanter was still 3/4 full. I left it for him to finish. Someone else had been quicker." She lifted her left hand to brush back a strand of pale gold hair. The movement was languid, almost drowsy. Poirot's gaze flicked to her fingers and stayed there. "Tell me, madame," he said softly, "when you handled the concentrated aconitine, did you wear gloves?" "Of course. Kid gloves lined with silk. I am not a fool." "Then how do you explain the faint blue stain beneath the nail of your right index finger?" "Aconitine is persistent, madam. It clings. It accuses." Lady Lydia stared at her hand as though it belonged to someone else. The crescent of cobalt beneath the nail was unmistakable in the firelight. For the first time her composure fractured. The jade holder trembled. Ash drifted onto the ivory satin like dirty snow. "I wore gloves," she repeated, but the words were a whisper. Poirot rose. "You wore gloves in the conservatory, yes. But when you poured the fatal measure into the decanter— there was haste, was there not? A moment of trembling excitement. 1 drop, no more, caught beneath the nail where no glove could protect. You did not notice. You had waited 15 years for this night." She looked up at him then, and the mask fell away entirely. Beneath the porcelain was steel. "He called me a parasite," she said clearly. "Every morning for 15 years he reminded me that I had brought nothing but beauty to the marriage, and that beauty fades. He bought me jewels the way other men buy muzzles for dogs. When he told me about Valerie Sinclair, 16 years old, common as dirt, and now the heiress to everything, I felt something break inside me. Not my heart, Monsieur Poirot. Something cleaner." She crushed the cigarette out with sudden violence. "I distilled the poison in tiny batches, over months. I tested it on the kitchen cat. Poor little beast died in 4 minutes. I waited until the new will was signed, until he believed he had won. Then I gave him the only gift had ever truly wanted from me. My absence, permanent and complete." Poirot's voice was almost tender. And yet you told me moments ago that you found him already dead." For a second she was confused, caught in the tangle of her own lies. Then she laughed, soft, musical, and quite mad. "Force of habit, monsieur. One lies for so long that the truth feels like bad manners." She extended both wrists, slender and white as stems. "Take me away. I am tired of pretending to be breakable." Poirot did not move. "Almost, madame," he said quietly. "Almost you have convinced me. But there is still one detail, one tiny blue detail, that does not fit." He turned to the door. "Tomorrow, in the library, all will be revealed. Until then, I advise you to rest. Murderesses, like actresses, should always be fresh for the final act." As we left, the scent of tuberoses seemed suddenly funereal. In the corridor, Poirot paused, eyes glittering. "She is magnificent, Hastings, a murderess in the grand manner, and yet something is not right. The little grey cells, they revolt." He tapped his temple once, sharply. "Tomorrow we set the trap, and then, mon ami, we shall see who bleeds monkshood blue." Chapter 8. The Little Blue Stain. The library doors were closed, the curtains drawn against the pale November sun. A single lamp burned on the desk where Sir Reginald had died. Around it, like mourners at a wake, sat the 4 remaining principals: Lady Lydia, Victor Lang, Felix Carstairs, and Daphne Weatherby, released for this final scene on Poirot's insistence. Inspector Japp stood by the fireplace, arms folded, face unreadable. Poirot entered last. He moved with the calm of a priest entering his own church. In his gloved hand he carried a small object wrapped in white silk. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, placing the bundle carefully on the blotter, "we have reached the denouement. One of you poisoned Sir Reginald Hargreaves with aconitine distilled from monkshood. One of you knew he would lock the door at 10 o'clock, drink alone, and die without cry or struggle. One of you left a trace no rain could wash away." He paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. "Last night Lady Lydia offered what she called a confession. Magnificent, theatrical, almost perfect. She described growing the monkshood, distilling the poison, waiting for the perfect evening. She even extended her wrists for the handcuffs. And yet she lied." Lady Lydia lifted her chin. "I tired of the game, monsieur. I told you the truth." "No, madame. You told me a story you had rehearsed for years, but stories have flaws." He turned to the others. "Observe." With deliberate ceremony, he unwrapped the silk. Inside lay a crystal brandy decanter, Sir Reginald's private decanter, stoppered and sealed with red wax. This was removed from the library immediately after death and locked in Scotland Yard's evidence safe. No one has touched it since. Yet last night Lady Lydia claimed she herself carried poisoned brandy to this room and poured it into the decanter. She said she found her husband already dead and left the decanter 3/4 full. He lifted the decanter to the light. It was completely empty. A small collective intake of breath. "Impossible," Lady Lydia whispered. "Precisely," Poirot said softly. "The decanter was found empty beside the body. The poison was in the glass alone, poured minutes before death. Someone entered this room after Sir Reginald locked the door, poured one fatal measure, and left the rest untouched. Someone who knew the house intimately. Someone who could move silently, unseen." He set the decanter down and produced a second object. A lady's kid glove, the right hand, faintly stained violet at the fingertips. "Found this morning in the conservatory, hidden beneath a potting bench. The stain is aconitine. The size is petite, and inside, embroidered in white silk, the initials LH. Lady Lydia stared at the glove as though it were a snake. Poirot continued. "But the most interesting discovery is this." He took her right hand, gently, irresistibly, and turned it palm upward. Beneath the manicured nail of the index finger was the unmistakable cobalt crescent. Monkshood stains for days. You wore gloves to distill the poison, madame, but when you poured the single measure into your husband's glass, there was emotion. A drop escaped. One drop. It is enough. Lady Lydia tried to pull away. Poirot held her fast. "Let us reconstruct the true sequence," he said. "2 weeks ago you learned of the new will. You began the final distillation. On the night of the murder, you waited until the house was quiet. You entered the library through the service door behind the panelling, the door Sir Reginald believed only he knew. You poured the poisoned brandy, knowing he would drink within minutes. Then you left the same way, locking the panel behind you. The main door remained bolted from the inside, a perfect locked room illusion." Victor Lang stirred, but the key was in the lock. The bolts were fastened. "From the inside," Poirot agreed, "because the murderer never used the main door. The panel opens from both sides if one knows the trick. Lady Lydia has used it for years to come and go unseen. Visits to the conservatory, midnight walks, secret meetings, ask the housemaids." Lady Lydia's face was deathly pale. "You cannot prove any of this. I can prove all of it." Poirot produced a final exhibit, a tiny glass phial containing blue residue scraped from beneath her nail that morning. "Chemical analysis will match this exactly to the poison in Sir Reginald's glass, and to the residue in your still. The chain is complete." For a moment she was statue still. Then something shifted behind her eyes. An ancient, terrible weariness. "He kept a ledger," she said quietly. "Not of money, of humiliations. Every time he struck me where the bruises would not show. Every time he brought a girl to the London house and made me dismiss her in the morning. 15 years of entries. When he showed me the new will, he said, 'Now you will learn what it is to be nothing.' I decided he would learn first." She laughed once, softly. "I practiced on the cat. I timed it to the second. 4 minutes of astonishment, then peace. I wanted him to have those 4 minutes alone with what he had made of me." The room was utterly silent. Poirot's voice was almost sorrowful. "You are a brilliant woman, madame, imprisoned in a cruel marriage. You chose murder as your divorce." Lady Lydia looked at each of us in turn. Lang, Felix, Daphne, and finally at Poirot. "Hang me if you must," she said. "At least the rope will be honest." Inspector Japp stepped forward with the handcuffs. This time she did not resist. As she passed me, she paused. "Tell them, monsieur," she said to Poirot, "that I regret nothing except the cat." The door closed behind her. The library felt suddenly larger, colder, as though a malevolent spirit had finally been exorcised. Poirot stood alone by the desk, gazing at the empty chair where Sir Reginald had died. "Sometimes, Hastings," he said at last, "the little grey cells uncover a truth we almost prefer to leave hidden. Justice is served, but humanity is the poorer." He adjusted his moustache, a small mechanical gesture of order restored. "Come, there is a train to London at 4, and somewhere, no doubt, another impossible crime awaits." Chapter 9. The Psychology of a Murderess. The house seemed to exhale once Lady Lydia was gone. Constables tramped in and out, carrying boxes of evidence, the copper still, the ledgers, the stained glove, the empty decanter. Yet the library retained its chill, as though the walls themselves refused to believe the drama was over. Poirot lingered by the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, staring into the dying coals. I had seen him like this before, after particularly brutal cases, when triumph felt too much like defeat. Victor Lang broke the silence first. He had not moved since the handcuffs snapped shut. "She was always the one," he said hoarsely. "We hated him, all of us, but she lived inside the hatred. It kept her warm." Felix Carstairs, pale and suddenly very young, poured himself a brandy from a different decanter with shaking hands. "I thought it was just another society marriage. Bored wife, cruel husband, separate bedrooms. I never imagined, God, she poisoned the cat first." Daphne Weatherby stood apart, arms wrapped around herself as though holding something in. "She fooled me most of all," she whispered. "I wanted her to be guilty so badly that I helped make her look guilty, and all the time she was." Poirot turned. His face was grave, almost sad. "Non, mes amis, you misunderstand. Lady Lydia did not wake one morning and decide to kill. She was forged for it year by year, like a blade in fire. Sir Reginald was not merely cruel, he was methodical. He understood that the slowest way to murder a soul is to convince it that it deserves to die." He began to pace, small, precise steps, speaking as much to himself as to us. "Consider the psychology. A beautiful woman of 22 marries a man 25 years older because he is powerful and she has no money. At first he is proud of her, shows her off like a jewel. Then pride turns to suspicion. Every smile she gives another man is treason. Every dress is an attempt to attract lovers. He begins to punish her, not with fists at first, but with words, with silence, with the slow withdrawal of all warmth. By the 5th year, she is a prisoner in a gilded cage. She dares not leave because she has no training, no money of her own, and society will call her ungrateful. So she learns the only weapon left to her, perfection. She becomes fragile, untouchable, the ideal ornament, and inside the hatred grows like monkshood, slow, silent, lethal." Felix swallowed. "He hit her?" "Never where it showed," Poirot said. "A blow to the body can be hidden, a blow to the pride must be worn in public. He kept the ledger, yes, but she kept something worse, memory. Every humiliation filed away, every calculated cruelty. When he brought the chorus girl into their London house and forced Lydia to dismiss her with a smile, something finished crystallizing. The poison was already growing in the conservatory." Daphne Weatherby's voice was barely audible. "Why did she never leave?" "Because leaving would have meant admitting he had won," Poirot replied. "Divorce in 1936 still required proof of cruelty, and his cruelty was too refined for the courts. Besides, she had discovered a colder revenge. To stay, to outlive him, to inherit everything and spend it on whatever amused her. Then came the new will. Suddenly, even that future was stolen." He stopped beside the desk where Sir Reginald had died. "So she chose the locked room. Not for cleverness alone, though she is very clever, but because it was symbolic. For 15 years he had locked her out of his heart, his trust, his life. Now she would lock him in with death. The poison was intimate, administered by the wife he despised, in the brandy he drank to celebrate her ruin. And the service door behind the panelling? That was the final irony. All those years he believed he controlled her comings and goings, never knowing she had her own key to freedom. Victor Lang crushed out his cigar with unnecessary force. She could have poisoned him any night. Why wait? Because timing is the murderess's art, Poirot said. She needed him to know why. The new will gave her the perfect moment. He would die believing he had triumphed, only to discover too late that triumph belongs to the one still breathing. I found my voice. And the cat? Poirot's eyes softened. The only creature in that house that loved her without calculation. She tested the dose on it because she could not bear uncertainty. When it died in 4 minutes, she wept, not for the cat, but because she finally knew the exact measure of her hatred. Silence settled again, heavier than before. Felix spoke at last, almost inaudibly. "Will she hang?" Poirot considered. "The Crown will seek it. The newspapers will demand it. A beautiful aristocrat who poisoned her husband with garden flowers, irresistible. Yet juries are sometimes merciful to women who have suffered too much. Perhaps a plea of insanity. Perhaps penal servitude for life. Either way, she is free of him now." He moved to the window and drew back the curtain. Outside, the gardens lay sodden and bleak, but a thin November sun was breaking through. "She once told me she regretted nothing except the cat," he said. "I believe her. In her mind, justice has been exact. The parasite devoured the host, and the ledger is balanced." Daphne Weatherby began to cry, quiet, hopeless tears. Poirot turned from the window. "Come, Hastings, we have done what we came to do. The truth is out, and it is uglier than any lie." As we left the library for the last time, he paused on the threshold. "One day, perhaps, English law will recognize that there are murders born not of greed or passion, but of slow suffocation. Until then, Hercule Poirot can only point to the blue stain beneath the fingernail and say, 'Here is the evidence, and here also is the wound that never healed.'" The door closed behind us. Somewhere in the distance, a clock struck 3 clear and cold as a verdict. Chapter 10. Justice, Poirot style. The drawing-room fire had burned low. Outside, a pale November sun hung over the Kent hills like a coin that had lost its value. The house was quiet now. No more comings and goings of police, no more whispered conferences in corridors. Only the faint smell of monkshood seemed to cling to the curtains, as if the flowers themselves refused to be forgotten. Lady Lydia had been taken away at dawn. She had walked between 2 constables with the same serene poise she had once used descending the staircase at Ascot. Only now the black lace was replaced by a plain dark coat, and the pearls by steel handcuffs. She had not looked back. Poirot stood at the French windows, hands clasped behind him, watching the police car disappear down the lime avenue. I knew that look. The little Belgian was balancing satisfaction against sorrow, the way a banker weighs gold against blood. Inspector Japp came in, rubbing his hands against the cold. "Well, that's that. Charge sheet drawn up. Murder by aconitine poisoning. Crown versus Lydia Margaret Hargreaves. The Yard's happy. The Chief Constable's happy. The newspapers will be ecstatic. You've given us an open and shut case, Poirot." Poirot turned. His eyes were very green in the thin light. "Open and shut, you say? Non, mon ami. Open, perhaps. Shut, never." Japp frowned. "What's that supposed to mean? We've got the poison, the still, the stained glove, the residue under her nail, the secret panel, the motive. She practically gift-wrapped herself." Poirot gave a small, sad smile. "Precisely. She gift-wrapped herself. That is what troubles the little grey cells." He moved to the fireplace and warmed his hands, though the day was not cold. "Consider, Japp. A woman plans the perfect murder for 15 years. She grows the rarest monkshood, distills the purest aconitine, chooses the one evening when her husband will lock himself away to gloat. She enters by a door no one remembers, pours a single fatal glass, leaves the rest untouched, exits unseen, brilliant, flawless. And then, what does she do? She leaves the still dirty, the glove half hidden, the blue stain on her finger for all to see. She confesses not once, but twice, each time more dramatically than the last. Does this sound to you like the same intelligence that conceived the crime?" Japp opened his mouth, closed it again. Poirot continued softly. "Lady Lydia wished to be caught. No, more than that. She wished to be punished. Why? Because punishment is the only door left through which she can walk out of that marriage with her head high. The rope, or a life sentence, is still freedom. Sir Reginald ruled her by fear and contempt for 15 years. In death, he would have ruled her by poverty and disgrace. She chose a third way, to make the world acknowledge that she had suffered enough. I felt suddenly cold. You mean she wants to hang? I mean, Hastings, that she wants the story to end in a manner befitting a tragedy. The beautiful poisoner, the cruel husband, the locked room, the monk's hood. It is Greek, it is grand, it is final. Divorce would have made her ridiculous. Flight would have made her fugitive. But execution, or even imprisonment as a martyr, makes her immortal. Japp scratched his head. Then what the devil are we supposed to do? Let her go? Poirot's eyes flashed. Certainly not. She is guilty. She did poison him. The evidence is overwhelming. But justice is not only what the law requires. It is what the soul can bear. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small envelope sealed with green wax. This morning, before she was taken away, Lady Lydia gave me this. She asked that it be opened only after the trial. I have decided to respect her wish in part. He broke the seal and unfolded a single sheet of heavy cream paper. Poirot read aloud, "To whichever jury tries me. I killed Reginald Hargreaves with poison I grew myself. I watched him die and felt no pity. Hang me if you can find 12 honest men who would not have done the same after 15 years of refined cruelty. If you cannot, lock me away until I am old and forget his face. Either sentence is lighter than the one I have already served. Lydia Hargreaves, Hargreaves Hall, 14th of November, 1936. He folded the letter carefully and handed it to Japp. This will not be needed at the trial, he said, but it may be needed afterwards, when the newspapers have finished feasting and the public begins to ask whether every murderess deserves the rope. Japp took the letter as though it might burn him. You're a queer one, Poirot. Most detectives would give their eye teeth for a confession like that. Most detectives, Poirot replied, have never looked into the eyes of a woman who has been buried alive for 15 years and finally dug her way out with a teaspoon. He picked up his hat and gloves from the table. Come, Hastings. The 347 to Charing Cross waits for no man, not even Hercule Poirot. As we walked down the steps to the waiting car, the weak sun caught the glass roof of the distant conservatory and turned it, for one moment, the exact cobalt of monkshood. Poirot paused. One day, perhaps, he said quietly, the law will recognize slow murder, the kind that takes years and leaves no mark upon the skin. Until then, we do what we can with the tools we have. The chauffeur closed the door. Gravel crunched beneath the wheels as we moved off. I looked back once. Hargreaves Hall stood against the pale sky like a mausoleum that had finally received its rightful occupant. Poirot followed my gaze. Sometimes, mon ami, he murmured, the perfect crime is not the one that goes unpunished, but the one that punishes the criminal more completely than any court could manage. He settled back against the cushions, closed his eyes, and said no more until we reached London. In the train he ordered a tisane, adjusted his moustaches in the window's reflection, and remarked almost to himself, "Another impossible crime solved. And yet, Hastings, I feel strangely as though we have all been accessories after the fact, to a marriage that should never have been allowed to live." The whistle blew. We steamed north, leaving Kent and its blue flowers behind us. Somewhere ahead, London waited, grey, indifferent, and full of fresh mysteries. Poirot twirled his moustache one last time. "Forward," he said softly, "always forward. The little grey cells never sleep." And the train carried us on, into the gathering dusk.